This is the heartache that I've known.
And welcome to the podcast, Talking the Talk with Don. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing, it's good. It was kind of gray and rainy, so I was pretty happy. But then the sun came out, and I had to close all the curtains. And I've got this thing about the sun. I'm not a big fan of it, obviously.
I'm the same way. That's why the Pacific Northwest is a great place for me for that exact reason. So it's overcast, although, it's very bright at the same time, and the clouds are just thin enough that everything is, you still need sunglasses when you go outside. It's kind of like that. But yeah, it's January, as everyone likes to call it, because it's the month of June, but I like it. So
what do you like about it?
Again, the sun thing. I have very light sensitive eyes. So living in a place that's overcast and that rains a lot is really helpful in that department. And, there's it's like a Scandinavian concept called huga. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, but I've never heard anyone actually really talk about it, to be honest.
It's a cultural concept of essentially, because it's very dark and rainy and cold there. And what they do is they just embrace it. So they want to, light candles, wear like really cozy, comfy things, just hunker down inside and make it this really warm and comforting kind of thing, So I like to do the same exact thing.
I think the older that I've gotten, and I kind of felt this way, like maybe, probably starting about 25 years ago or so, but that there's some comfort in the dark, I guess you would sort of say, like, there's, I don't know, like, I feel like for so long as kids, we're kind of taught that the dark is kind of a spooky place or a scary place or a somber thing. And the older I've gotten, I've kind of found this beauty in kind of dark, gray, overcast, cold, because like you said, like, I don't know, there's something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do find something comforting in it as well.
Your first album, which is out, is called Ancient Tomes, right?
Yes.
Volume 1, The Mother of Light. And I have to say that it was one of the most intriguing and honestly emotionally moving things that I've heard in a long time. And there's a handful of artists that have put out music that have moved me this much. I was very excited to see that there was an American out here. Is that kind of where that came from? There seems to be a very European kind of Scandinavian influence to your writing.
It wasn't deliberate, but I do feel, that over the years I've listened to a lot of music from Europe and Scandinavia. And so of course it does directly influence what I'm doing, whether I mean it to or not, I think it just kind of happens that way.
I think one of the things that struck me actually first off was that you kind of took on the I don't want to say a moniker, but it's almost like a personality of sorts with Serpentent. And so am I talking with Anne K. O'Neill or Serpentent, or are they the same?
That's interesting because I feel like a few people have brought that up, and Serpentent is not intended to be a moniker. It's kind of this overarching project umbrella that is just a way to identify the project. And even the name itself, actually, just to kind of like background story on that, was when I started writing some music, I got to this place where I was like, I think I should do something with it. And then I actually ended up with the name because it literally came into me in a dream. And it was this whole scenario of being in this sort of like ancient courtyard with all of these ruins, and there were all of these women that were wearing these black shrouds, and they were marching in a procession, and they were chanting that word over and over again. And I woke up saying it, And I was like, Serpentent, wait, what is that? And I wrote it down immediately because I was like, this is really bizarre and awesome. And then I also, of course, looked it up. I was like, is this even an actual word? And it turns out that in French, it is a word. It's pronounced completely different, of course. But it's a verb, which is like to wind or snake.
Right.
But yeah, and so when I had that dream, I immediately was like, well, that's what I have to call this. I have to call my project Serpentent. This is felt right,
This was one of the hardest records for me, or albums for me to review in a long time, because I couldn't just do a review. I was like, this album is so much more than just this song was good and this song was good. This song, you know what I mean? And so I really kind of found myself connecting with it in a way that I didn't quite understand. But when I saw how how it had been under the Serpentent umbrella, it all of a sudden made sense to me, because like you said, it was almost kind of like an identity of kind of a way to identify the different aspects of your creative output. So is there something besides Serpentent about you that carries over into another other different musical worlds? Or Serpentent your primary thing?
Yeah, that is my primary thing. At least, at this point. In the past, I've been in other bands. And I am currently an active member in a death industrial project called To End It All, none of that actually is my original material. That's all my friend Joy von Spain and her partner Masaki. And they invited me to play guitar and do backing vocals on that. And I love what they do. So, and it's, and it's right. Yeah, it just makes sense, provided my background, because, it's I've been involved with underground music scenes since I was 13. I started going to, punk shows and metal shows as a teenager, but, that said, I think it's interesting too that you're picking up on all the different things that go into Serpentent, because my interests in music they're just all over the place, So, because I grew up around musicians, my grandmother was a pianist, was a phenomenal singer, so I feel like the thing about Serpentent is it does feel like my outlet to kind of draw from all of these different things that have inspired me over the years and just kind of put it all into one thing.
There's so many layers. I hear occult rock, I hear, some modern dark folk, but I also hear elements of Joan Baez and Buffy Sainte Marie, the kind of darker, the not so pretty around the edges kind of stuff but this stuff was stuff that really spoke to you, and spoke to me. Even Kate Bush, at times I heard some in there. Am I kind of in the right area as far as some of the influences that you pull from?
Yeah, absolutely. Nailing it, actually. I think another big one is Yes was a huge influence. It's still a huge influence for me. I adore that band. And that contributes to because some of those songs are lengthy, and and that's kind of part of where that comes from. Also, it's just my interest in classical music as well. Because I can play classical piano, and but that's also why Yes spoke to me, was because it's when you look at that record Close to the Edge, and they have songs that are broken down into chunks, and they're so you have And You and I, but then it's in 3 parts,
like suites of sorts.
Right. And so when I saw that, I was like, this is incredible. I want to write these kinds of songs, but clearly it's a different vibe. I'm not writing really intricate prog rock.
To be able to do songs that long too, you can't just phone it in. You've got to really have something to say, musically and lyrically, but at the same time, kind of creating a visual narrative. Sonnet on Orpheus 4, it's clocking in at almost 11 minutes. What is the deciding factor for you in how long, does it just come out at a certain point, like as far as how long the song is going to be when you're creating it? Or do you kind of go into it going, okay, I've made a 3-minute song, but I want it to be 10 minutes and 14 seconds?
No, the length is not a deliberate thing. It is something that, it just kind of depends on what happens with the song as I write it. And it's interesting, because the Sonate on Orpheus is that was a whole other interesting process, because I was learning to speak German and still learning. And I found a book of Rilke's poems, and the book is Sonnets to Orpheus. And I was reading it in German, not completely understanding all of it, but I was like, I don't know. I was like, this is heavy. This is impacting me, even just the phonetics of it. And then I read the translation, and I was like, it's literally heavy. It's like translating like human emotions to like the earth, and, and just taking all of our heaviness and putting it back into the planet. And it's this whole cyclical thing. And I was like, I have to write a song with this poem as the lyrics, and then somehow, also with that, it just so happened that the timing, so the beginning part of it's actually in 5/4. It's a 5/4 signature, which, is just one of those things where it's like, oh, well, it just coincidentally worked with like the meter of the poem, and then yeah, from there, the rest of it just unfolded. That song changes time signatures 3 times,
which would excite the prog rockers everywhere, but to be honest.
Totally. But I when I started it, I wasn't like, I'm going to change time signatures 3 times. It just worked, and it felt organic, and it was just part of the creative process.
Well, so speaking of the album, you had your album release this past weekend, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And I was curious, because I would have loved to have seen how these songs were translated into a live setting. So how was that for you to kind of take these songs that were pretty grand and find a way to present them in a live setting with what it was as a trio? Am I right? It was like you and 2 others?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a lot of music for 3 people to be making, So how was that for you as far as making that happen?
Yeah. It was really fun. And, I feel like it also kind of ties into my grand plan with Serpentent too, is to write songs that I can play on my own. So, there are going to be times where it's just me playing some like stripped down acoustic versions of these songs. But then, it's like having these solid foundations, that you can build on to greater or lesser degrees. So with playing as a, as a trio, so we had Dylan Desmond on bass, and it really helps also that he is a wizard and can so he can do so many different things, and he does a lot of like tapping and, so many things. So it sounds sometimes like it's more than just a bass. It sounds like multiple instruments, and he has all these pedals, like he's truly a master of his craft. And then the other person on stage with me was my friend Jess, who he has a really heavy industrial project called Switchblade. And, it's like we've been friends for some time, and I went to one of his shows though, and I was like, oh, wow, like he's really great at drum programming, can multitask and, do like a bunch of synth stuff. So, I invited him to play, and, he knocked it out of the park. So, so he was doing drum programming, doing synths. I'm playing guitar. I've got a bassist that sounds like it's multiple instruments, so it all came together in this So it's not as complex as, you know, what you listen to on the record, but it was still very like rounded and full, you know.
With this kind of music too, especially with the, like I said, with the layers and the just the overall arrangements of the songs, I'd almost be kind of bummed if I went and heard it live and was like, wow, that sounds just like whenever people would say, wow, they sounded just like the record, like to me, I'd be like, is that really good? Like I want to hear kind of an organic spin or like you said, kind of more like something like a natural presentation. Was this the first time you performed like this with this material, or have you done this as Serpentent before?
This was the first time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and it was really fun. And I also feel like we did have to do some problem solving, especially when you're working with gun programming, you know, and it's like, all right, like there's only so many ways you can do this, you know, because no one can start unless you have in-ear monitors and have like the tempo going. So, you know, we had to come up with some creative solutions, but it was really great and it worked. And I, you know, even had a friend in the audience on Saturday who is also a musician and was completely unaware of, you know, all of the work that we put into that. And he commented on how smooth those transitions were. He was like, that was really cool. And I was like, thank you for noticing, you know? So it's great.
I have a bad habit of loving music and bands that live nowhere near me. So like now being that you're in America, probably more likely I'll get to see you than some of my European friends. But is this something you're going to take on the road eventually? As far as like a kind of an extensive tour of sorts?
Yeah, I hope so. I am currently trying to, you know, talk with a booking agent about setting something up. Because also, you know, next year I actually will be relocating to Berlin, so I will soon not be technically.
I'm losing. Oh God, I was so happy to have you here. Oh, I know you're leaving. Okay, well, I'll forgive you. It's okay. So why Berlin?
Oh well, several reasons, I guess. So quite a while ago, you know, I visited and I loved it. And then I had just, you know, kind of entertained the idea of possibly going back. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so this winter, I just decided to see about applying for an artist residency there. And I sent in my application. And then a month later, they were like, you're in. So, you know, it's like that basically, I'm just going to go there late December. The residency starts the first week of January. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I figure once I'm there, I'm just going to hang out and see what happens. And I have so many friends there. It's just kind of like, it's sort of like my European home base. So.
Oh, that's great.
And it just, you know, I just really appreciate that, you know, Europe really seems to appreciate artists a lot more than the United States. You know, there's a lot of opportunities and grants and all sorts of things happening over there that just unfortunately are not accessible here.
Like when I see these musicians coming out of Sweden who are old enough to be my kids and they're playing music and they're supported by their government and their country and they're encouraged. And I'm like, if I would have known then what I knew now, you know, like, although I wouldn't have met my wife, but that's a whole other thing. But, you know, yeah, there's something to be said about going someplace where you're going to be appreciated and also inspired and pushed a little more than you are.
That's it right there, you know? Yeah. And everything that you just said right there, you know, it's like when you look at, I mean, especially in Scandinavia, you know, it's like I love a lot of Scandinavian black metal. And, you know, you look at like some of those bands in the 80s and some of those guys were like 14 years old cranking out like these amazing records. And you're like, wait, what? And you're like, oh, it's because they're encouraged to do this. And they, you know, they have access to these resources. And then of course, you know, they spend winter like snowed in, but it's something. I really wish that I had like that head start, you know, but what can you do?
I don't know. You're doing pretty damn good because this album is like, I mean, And I'm never going to forgive you, by the way, if you move to Berlin and never come back and tour. I'll be so sad and devastated.
No, I definitely I would love to go on like a proper full United States tour. So,
and this type of music also seems to be sadly overlooked and even underplayed, I think, or underutilized in the States. And I always feel like I jokingly get to ask a lot of my Swedish and Finnish friends who are in all these great bands, like, it must be in the water. What do you think is not in the water here that keeps more artists from developing such an incredible sound like yourself? What is our water lacking?
Well, that's a really good question. I think maybe part of it could be attributed to just how, like our society is so consumer based, that I think a lot of people, they see bands that are successful, and rather than try to come up with something that is original and it's their own thing, they just want to mimic everyone, So I think that there's a lot of that. And, and sometimes that could be cool. It's like there are some bands that are really fantastic, and there are tons of carbon copies of them. And, but it's like at the end of the day, there's like, as an example, there's really only one Neurosis. There's a ton of bands that sound like them. But, but like, how is that going to, I don't know, do anything other than just like maybe the people playing that music, like that makes them happy and that's great. But, I don't know. Am I making sense?
You're actually making total sense, because as you were saying this, like I just was reminded of I was talking to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago. We were talking about bands who sound like other bands, and one of the things he was talking, what are they doing as artists to kind of further, broaden the scope of what, people are gonna listen to, like, I don't know, it's like, when I listen to, Jess and the Ancient Ones and Lycanthropy and Wucan, I want to go listen to, Jethro Tull and Jefferson Airplane, you know what I mean? But they're doing their thing to kind of broaden that scope of what modern music is, instead of just doing a carbon copy.
I do also think that a lot of people are doing that because they think that that's going to bring them success. But then I think that ties into it. I think if you're doing something simply because you're like, oh, well, this is gonna be real popular, I think it's very transparent. I think people see through that, whereas, I mean, that was not my intention ever. When I started writing music, I wasn't like, oh, this is gonna get real popular. I just wanted to channel all of these different things and feelings and concepts from books I read, and just have something to, I don't know, make sense of everything that's up in my brain, because there's a lot going on up there, so.
Do you feel like that as you've gotten older, like, and not just age, but in just as an artist in general, or as a writer, that the further along you get, the more freer you become, or the more, like, the less you care about, like you said, like, who's going to like this and who isn't?
Absolutely. I think that, there's something magical about, I don't know, for me anyway, it was definitely like when I turned 30, and that was 8 years ago. But yeah, I've really felt like there was this kind of shift where all of a sudden I stopped caring about expectations, or, or like, what are people going to think, or any of that stuff, which, also with, I don't know, it's funny how even like my background with a lot of like extreme music and punk and metal, like generally speaking, you would think that, oh, like, who cares what anybody thinks? But that sticks with you for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad, like, when I hit that point where it was like, all right, yeah, I don't care anymore. And then the more I do things and the more I work on things, I feel very free. That's like a really good word for it. Because I don't know. I don't want to have any boundaries. I just want to be able to, like, get my ideas out into the world, and I'm stoked to, like, be in a place where I have the confidence to do that,
What was that defining moment for you?
Right. Well, and I feel like I should, it was mostly with music specifically. And it was, 8 years ago, because I guess I was in my first band when I was 28.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was a really great experience. It was kind of like this sort of like post-punk death rock band that some friends of mine started. Yeah, it was really fun. And that was kind of this moment of, okay, this is a thing that I really want to. Well, I'm sorry, my thoughts are all over the place, because I was like, it's a thing that I really wanted to pursue before that, but I think that really, like, set that in stone, But with that being said, it's like most of my experience prior to that has been like as a visual artist, so it's like, because I've been painting since I was a kid, but I started having art shows in my mid-20s, and it's just this thing that I was so used to and comfortable with that, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's just this thing that I do. Whereas, with music, I think, like, I placed, like, so much importance on it that it was I was kind of nervous, honestly, at first. It was like, whoa, okay, this is this thing that, like, it's a really big deal to me. And, but yeah, it was like with that first band, though, like, that really, like, helped me get over a lot of that. And then, yeah, again, I think also just getting older and being like, who cares? Like, literally, who cares? I just want to do this thing. And it makes me happy.
The whole concept of the album, let's see, I kind of wrote a little thing. It said, so it's the first part of a trilogy, which is a conceptual trilogy, the ancient tomes, right? And this one, the Mother of Light, I kind of had that it kind of personifies death, at least to me, with this beautiful entity, as opposed to one that's kind of like dark and eerie or whatever. But where did that overall concept come from? And because that's not a very easy, like, I don't just get up one morning and go, I'm going to write a 3-part concept album, like, so where did this brew from?
There are quite a bit of things that go into it. I think, it's hard to, where do I start? I think a big part of it started with, I was actually in a really, really bad car accident that, I almost died. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. Just to get heavy on it. But
no, thank you for sharing that, by the way. This is, yeah.
And so, it's like in coming out of that, definitely had a lot of time to reflect on things. And then it's like, and then after that, it's like, then my grandmother passed away, and I was very close with her. And it, it's just one of those things, like, it was a very dark time. And, I'm not a religious person. I think organized religion is, I'm sorry if you're religious, but it's like, for me,
look, I was raised Catholic, and I haven't been Christian since 1992. So I think, yeah, you're talking to the right person. So please keep it. Now I feel even more connected to you. So please, yes.
But yeah, so I was like, well, I don't believe in prayer. I'm not going to read the Bible. But what I have always gravitated towards is philosophy, and I take a lot of comfort in reading philosophy books, because it's kind of trying to take our reality and make sense of it. And, you know, with the understanding that maybe we're never going to completely make sense of it, but, you know, we can try, right? And so I think that's where a lot of these ideas came from. You know, I read a lot of George Bataille at the time, and
yeah, that's not light reading.
No, no, it certainly is not. But you know, it's like he has some concepts. Like his nonfiction is incredible. Like I think it's. I mean, and you know, his fiction writing is interesting too, but it's not. And I've read some of his fiction and the whole. I don't know. It's anyway. I'm kind of getting off track. But yeah, I wanted to touch base on some of his ideas surrounding death, and there's one. Well, it's hard to explain without giving away like the whole trilogy. He has a book called The Accursed Share, and there was one specific thing that he wrote about in it when he talks about like just basically like the laws of nature and how that correlates to how we exist as a society and the problems that can occur when there's overabundance. And it just, you know, it was one of those things that just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just couldn't shake it. So, you know, I basically wanted to take that and just explore it, but with music, and tie it into this whole theme of like, you know, the death of death. And, you know, because we live in this modern world where we're constantly trying to avoid death, but then also like we cause the death of like all of these things that don't have to die. And we're like killing cultures, and, you know, so there's so much at play with the concept of this record and the trilogy for that matter. But I felt like because there is so much involved with it, that it would make sense to break it down into different sections. And then I think maybe like the more obvious thing is to do like 3 parts, because, you know, in the occult and esoteric studies and all of these things, like 3 is such it's a huge number, and it's, you know, very representational of like different cycles, and, you know, there's like start, middle, and end. That whole thing. So, you know, I just went with that, and it all came together into this concept trilogy.
I think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's so, because like you said, or like you touched on earlier about not having religious ties or being Christian or anything like I don't, you know, I think any form of organized religion is just I feel like it's encapsulating, you know, like it creates too much of a cocoon for people. And, you know, and I'm sure people who practice would disagree, but one of the things you mentioned was like the occult and the esoteric and stuff. I really started to delve into that over the past maybe 12 years or so. And one of the things I was super shocked, or not even really shocked, but I still kind of laugh about it, is people seem to assume that if you are even a practitioner of the occult or dark, you know, the dark magics, or, you know, left-hand path, whatever it is you do, that you're broken, or that something terrible happened to you, or somebody touched you badly when you were a kid to make you just hate God. And then I was like, you know what? I was like, something did break me, but not in a way that was like that, but maybe it was like something occurred in my life that made me go, and of course I can pinpoint it, but that made me go, you know what? Yeah, this isn't jiving with me. Like, you know, and then the minute I denounced religion and Christianity or anything else, all of a sudden I felt like my life just got so much lighter, and like I could concentrate on just being a good person, you know, and living a good life, as opposed to fearing what was going to happen after we die, you know?
Right.
So like in the ancient tomes, like you said, like when we're talking about kind of, you know, putting death to death of sorts, what do you believe happens to us after we leave this living plane, if that's not too personal to ask you. But
I don't think it's too personal. I would say that I don't really know. I don't, but I don't believe in like heaven and hell or purgatory or any of those things, because as far as things like that go, I pay more attention to the laws of physics, and it's like when you think about like what happens to energy, I just like to think that maybe like, whatever energy is within us, because we all have, electricity is what's making our bodies do what they do. And that has to go somewhere, right? Yeah. But, there's so many different outlets. There's so many different places. It could become part of the wind. It could go into the sea. It could, just go somewhere, I think. But it's not like, it's the energy that's within our bodies also is like, it's not connected to our brain. Like our brain is like physical matter. The information that we're processing is completely attached to that physical matter. Once our brain stops working, all of that information's gone, it just, but there's the energy. So I don't know. Part of me likes to think that maybe even we just like shoot out into the atmosphere and we just go surfing through the stars. But, I don't know for sure, but
see, I love that. No, because that was my actually personal thought too, is that we just kind of disperse, like we just kind of become, I don't know. Like I always thought it was kind of funny that, in Catholic religion, you would hear ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and I was just like, but that's exactly what we are, like, the Joni Mitchell song, we're stardust, we're billion-year-old carbon, and I'm just like, we're just going to become energy again, But wow, this totally took a different turn than I was expecting it to. I hope that doesn't bug you out, So.
No, these are great questions. I've only had, I guess, 2 other interviews, but these are very different questions than the last couple of ones that I've had, and I'm for it,
Oh, good. Well, it's kind of funny because I usually come up with these questions like kind of like a prompt of questions in case like it's not going well, and then I can just turn it into a Q&A. But all of a sudden, like sometimes I just totally go off the page, and now I'm looking at I'm like, I have no idea where I'm at, but I'm happy. This is great. So, but well, so the other 2 parts of Ancient Tomes, are they complete? Ready to go? Are they recorded, or are they like, are you just having to go in and just do them as you're ready?
Yeah, that is where I'm at with it. Because the pandemic really, as with everybody, it created a lot of setbacks, and so it's like even getting this first record complete was quite the task at the end of the day, even though, it was like we had everything ready to go, but there were just so many things that got postponed. And then of course, like from the financial standpoint, it was just, I don't know, there's just been a lot of like catch up, but the next 2 records, they are written, so they are ready to be recorded. And hopefully, the second record, we're going to go in and record probably like late fall, early winter. So ideally before I bounce to Berlin. And
that seems like it would be the perfect time too. Like, like weather wise and kind of vibe wise to go in to recording. And that's what I was also going to ask you. That kind of goes into this one, was that, being, in the Pacific, Northwest, where you were at, how much of that inspired or even helped you capture the vibe that you captured on Ancient Tomes 1?
I would say it contributed quite a bit. Quite a bit. Just, the landscape out here, it's so moody, just naturally, it's like even when you drive on the highway and you look side to side, you're just still surrounded by this like giant corridor of these like towering evergreens. And But then I like to spend a lot of time out in nature. I go hiking and do things like that. There's a lot of old growth forests, and I'm not from here. I moved here in 2006 from Kansas. So it's very different. Yeah, so it's like when I came out here, and I'll never forget the first time I went to an old growth forest, and you see like trees growing out of tree stumps. And, sometimes there's trees growing out of trees, like just depending on how long they've been there, which some of them it's like hundreds of years, And so there's something about, seeing that and seeing all of this like new life springing forth from all this death and decay. It's fascinating, and it made a huge impact on me. And I absolutely feel like that contributes to, like how I write music and how I conceptualize things. So
I only have a couple more questions for you. I feel like I've kept you way too long. I feel like I could keep you another hour. Which, that's a whole nother thing too. But is that, what was it about the overall vibe or sound of dark music that attracted you or appealed to you? Because, as we both know, like being not too far apart in age, at some point, like we were listening to music that was a little chirpier and happier than it is now, but then something happens that you're just like, oh, I want that. Like, what was that for you?
Well, so I'm the youngest, and I have 3 older brothers, all of whom were into, darker, weird music in like the late 80s, early 90s, So, when I was like 7, I'll never forget when one of my brothers came home with a Ride the Lightning tape and put it on. And I was, and 7-year-old brain was like, I don't know what this is. This is the fastest, weirdest thing I've ever heard. I really like it.
I want more.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, I feel like I'm really lucky to have had a lot of like really early exposure to a lot of music. And so, I think that kind of set the tone, and then it just, carried on from there, just to find more stuff that was different and interesting than what of course I did like some radio hits or whatever, especially, and then like all the grunge stuff that became very popular, and I was like super on all that. But definitely by the time I was 14 though, like if anything was on the radio, like I wanted nothing to do with it. It was just like this, and so and and then I guess, and that being said, also it's like, again, it's like with having older brothers, like I'll never forget like having these very early memories of just raiding the record store and going in and being like, okay, like what can we get, what can we afford? Because of course we had limited budgets because we weren't, particularly wealthy, but it was just this thing where like, pocket lunch money just so we could buy a tape or a CD or whatever,
I was a good friend of mine used to be the a PR person for Nuclear Blast Records, and her and I are pretty close in age, but we talk a lot, and she lives out in LA, and we're always talking about records, and I was I'm in that midlife crisis now where I'm like, not only am I buying vinyl, but I'm rebuying vinyl that I had when I was a kid that I might have got rid of at some point, because I want it back. And we were talking about how, back in the day is like, you could either usually buy a record or 2 cassettes. And so sometimes I had this like scattered media, like I might have, all the Iron Maiden albums on vinyl, but then I'd have like 4 of them on cassette because I wanted to get 2 at one time. So it was just amazing. Like kids will never know the struggle again, like what that was like,
Right. But, it's true. I don't know. And I guess, I feel lucky to have been kind of like right at the end of that. Because, I'm like kind of like right on the cusp of like Gen X millennials. And, I really value all of the effort that it took to find stuff, and because I didn't have the internet, we didn't have the internet. Mm-hmm. It was like you literally just had to find things from your like hearsay, like your friends giving you advice. Maybe you found a zine or something, or like those little slips and like the records that like have like,
oh yeah,
you could mail order and like pay for with a money order. So and it's interesting because there was a lot of stuff that like I did completely skip over just because I just did not know it existed. And but there's other stuff that that I discovered that would just blew my mind. Yeah, so I think it's neat. I really liked having that experience. And then now we do have everything at our fingertips, so if you do want to find something, it's pretty easy, which is great. But I don't know. I think it built some character.
I really do think it did too, because, I like what you were talking about how like, I don't know, if Iron Maiden was putting out a new album, like you had to just keep your fingers crossed and hope it was as good as the one before it. Like, cause you didn't get like a preview track online or like an advanced download. It's like you either got the single before it came out, and then you had to pray that the rest of it was as good.
Yeah.
So we had that element of surprise, and, but I also have to say that what I loved about your album with Ancient Tomes 1, you did not go slack on the packaging on this thing. That thing went right back to my childhood where like, I actually wish I could have a video of it. And cause I sat in my chair over here, put it on. I had it opened, like I was eating a candy bar and I'm reading the lyrics, and I'm going, God, I'm 13 all over again because it was so exciting. So did that come from that old school mentality of yours to want to put a package together like that?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Because of that exact same thing. It's like that excitement of when you open a record and then you find out that there's more than just a lyric sheet, or it's just like having all of these different things. It's like, it's very engaging and exciting, so yeah, I'm for that.
Well, I loved it and I spent a lot of time with it and I'm going to spend even more time with it. And I guess to close things out, what are we going to see from Serpentent for the rest of 2022?
Now, I am going to play with the Cascadia, which is like a summer solstice festival here in Washington. So that's I'm excited about that. And then I have some other shows in the works, but they aren't announced yet. So I don't think I'm supposed to talk about them. But we've got some like hopefully kind of bigger things coming up in August and October. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and then again, like working on trying to sort out details for doing a tour and hopping into the studio ideally in like probably November.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's been a while, but I appreciate your time, and I really enjoyed getting to know you and to learn more about your music and Ancient Tomes Part 1, The Mother of Light. Like I said, thank you so much for all your time. I appreciate it.
For sure. Likewise.